get it, stop and get out. It'll be easy, they say. Put a ride height on it, they say. Well, I'm here to tell you, there's something else. But let me show you what I did. Now let me show you the bracket that I fabbed up for the rod height sensor. So basically, there's math involved, but it's not that much math involved. But as a matter of fact, let me show you. The directions tell you to put in a template, which is what I did. Put up a piece of cardboard. And you want to run your suspension all the way up to where it bottoms out. Draw a line. Droop your suspension all the way down. Draw a line. You want to take the measurements from here to here. And that's your rod height travel. Not your total rod height travel. That's different because the farther out you get, the longer distance it is. But between this point and this point, and where your rod height sensor is going to be, you have to take that measurement, mount your rod height sensor, take the measurement of the arm, and cut it. Then make sure that where you're going to have your mounting point, basically just to make sure all the geometry works out. And I actually looked on YouTube, and there are a couple of videos of the proper way to do it. No, I'm not gonna say the proper way to do it, because nobody ever shows you this. However, I will say this: AccuAir gives you very detailed instructions on that. And in my opinion, I'm doing the rear, which the rear is easier because you don't have a lot of moving parts in the way of turning wheels like you do in the front of the car. So I figure I'll do the rear first. It'll be easy. So basically, my rod height sensor is going to mount here. I think they give you these really long screws so they don't know where you're going to be mounting it to. There we go. And I just got it snug on here so I can show you what I'm working with. Alright, so that's your rod height sensor, and this is your arm here, and this is the rod they give you. Now I've already cut this one, but basically when you lower your car, it'll go up that way, and when you raise your car, it'll go down this way. And you have to get that geometry right. You have to make sure that it has enough travel and not overextend the travel, because this all comes in pieces. You get the rod height sensor with the arm, and then you get the little rod that mounts from the sensor to your control arm, and you have to cut it to size. Actually, I already have 2 holes here on my lower control arm, so that's where I'm going to mount this into. The basic setup, it's really simple once you get past the mounting location and measurements. It's just deciding your mounting locations where you're not going to have any interference. This has to move in a linear fashion without binding, without any kind of kinks, without interfering with anything else. So we'll mirror that on the driver's side, and we're done with the rear, and all that's left is the front. different story. I opted to mount the rod height sensor up here on the inner fender well, and the reason I chose this is because it's really hard plastic. It's not like the kind that you see in the newer cars where it just flops around. This is actually hard, and you actually have stuff that's mounted to the inside of the fender well, as you can see with these bolts. Right on the other side of here is your ignition module. So this does not move. This is pretty hard. And so what I'm going to do is actually drill 2 holes in there. I'm going to use some jack nuts, and I'll show you what those are. So I'll be able to screw it on and screw it off. And I mounted the rod height sensor to my bracket here that I've been up. The plan here, or what I'm doing, is actually using the upper control arm to mount the rod height sensor here. And so as I lower the car, the arm will move up. As I lower the car, the arm will move down, relaying the height to the control module. And basically I just drilled a hole here to mount the little strut rod, for lack of a better word. So all that'll ride up and down together. Now I'm going to show you why I chose not to mount it to the lower control arm. So if we move around down here to the lower control arm, what we have here is the steering linkage. So when the car turns to the left, this moves this way, and subsequently this moves and comes all the way over to where the lower control arm is. And this piece right here is actually a bump stop for your steering linkage, or for the spindle. As it rotates, as you're turning left, it bump stops there. So that will mean that it limits where you can put the little strut rod, and you only get about maybe 8 inches of strut rod. So I'd have to mount the sensor or make a drop down bracket from the frame down here somewhere, hang it out in space, in order for the arm to be able to reach from the sensor all the way down to here. And that's not going to work. I mean, you can make it work, but you have to think about your wiring. You have to put your plug into where that sensor is and run that wire up here and then back, or however you plan on routing the wiring for your sensor. Let's move around to the front. Up front, you have your sway bar. You have your sway bar here. You have your strut rod. And then down over here, we kind of run into the same issue of where can we put it. Up here you have lines for your transmission. I'm sorry, your fuel lines. And you're very limited on your choices. So I think the best choice was to put it up here. And thirdly, it doesn't help that the frame is actually curved out, if you can see that. And where it's curved out is where the original coil spring was, and now it is where the airbag lives. So we're kind of limited on where we can mount it. So that's what I chose to do. And all I have to do is mirror that on the other side, and then we'll get them wired up, get the control module wired up, and go from there. Alright, so after all that fooling around with the driver's side upper control arm, thinking I'm going to mount it there, I think I'm just going to go ahead and mount it down here. So I'm going to clean this off so I can tack wheel the bracket up there and hang it from the bottom. Initially setting your ride height, you have this little range limiter to make sure you get where you should be. Once you do that, after you're set up, you can take it off. That just kind of snaps in here. Got the strut rod. Why do I keep calling it strut rod? It's a linkage rod connected. So I think I'm going to attach it to this lower swing arm right here. So I want to mock this up, make sure that I'm going to hold it. I'll use that to hold it in place. I'll run it up, make sure I don't have any interference. Run it back down, make sure it goes smoothly, and then we can put the other end, well, we'll cut this to length, put the other end on it, drill a hole in the lower control arm, mount it there, and Bob's your auntie. We're done with that. We'll mimic it on the other side, or mirror it on the other side, and then we'll be ready for wiring. But first, before we do that, we're gonna cycle this. Right now the wheels are pointed all the way to the right. I'm gonna turn this to the left and make sure, and I know we will, but just to make sure that we have clearance. And we do, and judging from the other side, even with the wheel and tire on there, I should be good. So I think we'll leave it like that, and run the lower control arm up. Well, if you noticed, this is contacting my bracket. I'm good on my strut rod. I'm good on my linkage rod and the travel, but I think what I'll do is cut this down and move the sensor up just a tad. So back to the drawing board. I think what I'll do is position this farther up, which shouldn't be a problem, and cut my bracket off here. Still should have enough linkage rod to reach down here. So we'll get that done. I'm just gonna come right across here. All right, here we go. Get your safety squints on. Did I cut too much off? Nope, I think we're good. And also, these sensors actually comes with a mounting plate. It's probably about 1/4 of an inch, so it'll stand off a little bit. So I'll still be able to get my connector up here, even though it's almost right up against the frame. So basically, I had to drill 2 more holes now. Let's do that. And these are slotted. So once you drill the holes, if you line your holes up right in the center, you can still kind of move them left or right. So I got my bolts and nuts almost tight, but you got to remember how you had it set when you initially did your initial mock-up. I know that mine was cocked a little bit to the left, and I had space here and I had space up here. So when you go to mount it up, you want to make sure that you mount it and tighten it up to the same point that you had your sensor, the same position that you had your sensor in when you initially mocked it up. So this is how I'm going to tighten mine, just with that little additional angle to it. And these sensors have metal sleeves in them, so you can tighten them down. I mean, you don't want to over tighten them, but they do have a metal sleeve in it, so you won't crush the plastic. Alright, so what I have to do now is, I'll go from this side so you can see, is mount up my bolt down at the bottom and run this through, and then we're done. All except for the wiring.